You ever get that feeling that your house is holding its breath? I'm not talking about creaky pipes or settling foundations. I mean a deep, gut-level wrongness that whispers up your spine. It started with a cold spot, a patch of wall in my hallway that felt like the inside of a freezer. No vents, no leaks, just icy, unnatural cold. I pressed my ear to the plaster, and I heard something that stopped my heart. Not rats, not wind. A slow, deliberate scratching rhythm, like fingernails counting down from inside the wall. Curiosity is a dangerous poison, and I drank it all. I swung the hammer, the drywall crumbled, and a breath of ancient, rotting air washed over me. Behind the dust, my flashlight caught a space that shouldn't exist. A hidden room, sealed and silent. The walls were covered in frantically scrawled handwriting, the same sentence, over and over, carved deep into the wood. Don't let it hear you breathe. Welcome back to Mr. Whispers. Tonight, you're not just a listener, you're a witness. I'm about to share 3 terrifying accounts from people who discovered nightmare spaces hidden in plain sight. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and take one last deep breath, because once we begin, you might start listening to your own walls differently. I never meant to find it. I just wanted to understand the cold. My name is Mark, and 6 months ago, I bought a foreclosure in the hollowed-out suburbs of Dayton, Ohio. It was a steal of a deal, the kind that makes you ignore the red flags screaming in the back of your skull. The realtor called it a handyman special. I called it my fresh start after the divorce. The first night I noticed the spot. It was in the upstairs hallway, right outside the master bedroom. A section of wall about the width of my shoulders. The paint looked normal. The drywall felt solid. But if you passed within 6 inches of it, the temperature dropped by a good 20 degrees. I told myself it was a drafty stud cavity or a hidden gap in the insulation. I lied to myself a lot back then. A week passed. The cold didn't just stay, it spread. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, shivering under 2 blankets, and the cold spot seemed to pulse like a malignant heart. I started taking temperature readings with an infrared gun. The surrounding wall sat at a normal 72 degrees. The spot, 41, exactly. Every single time, which was scientifically impossible for an interior wall in a heated house. I hired an inspector, a grizzled old-timer named Frank, who smelled like cigarette smoke and bad news. He ran his thermal camera over the drywall, furrowed his brow, and said the one sentence no new homeowner ever wants to hear: "There's a void back there that shouldn't exist." Frank wanted to drill a scope. I decided to go bigger. I was done with mysteries. I grabbed a framing hammer from the garage, a pair of safety goggles, and I didn't bother waiting for Frank to come back. Curiosity isn't just a poison, it's a screaming compulsion that drowns out every survival instinct you own. The first swing cracked the plaster, and a puff of air rushed out. It wasn't just cold air, it was dead air, thick with the stench of wet earth, copper, and something deeply, instinctively rotten. I gagged, pulling my shirt over my nose, and for a split second, the house let out a sound I can only describe as a low, satisfied sigh. The framing settled. A trick of acoustics. I needed to believe that. I swung again and again, teeth clenched, drywall dust clouding the hallway like a ghost. When I stopped, I had opened a ragged hole, roughly 3 feet by 3 feet. And my flashlight revealed a nightmare I couldn't process. Behind my wall, perfectly hidden, was a room with no door. It stretched back maybe 10 feet, wallpapered in a peeling, yellowed pattern of faded roses. There was a child-sized iron bed frame with no mattress, just bare rusted springs, and on a tiny wooden nightstand, a single object sat coated in a century of dust, a porcelain doll with its eyes glued shut. I should have run. I should have boarded it up, called the police, or burned the place down for the insurance money, but the handwriting caught my eye. Every square inch of that room's walls, even the ceiling, was covered in frantic, overlapping script. It was the same 4-word phrase, scrawled with what looked like a charred fingernail: "Don't let it hear you breathe," over and over. Some lines were carved deep into the plaster, others were just faint, desperate scratches, as if written in pure terror. I felt my own lungs freeze. My breathing had become loud, ragged, and wet with panic. I clamped my jaw shut, the weight of that sentence pressing against my chest like a physical hand. I didn't know what it was, but some primal part of my brain was already screaming at me to stop making sound. I leaned into the hole, shining the flashlight across the floor, and that's when I saw the bare, dirty footprints. They were human in shape, but the proportions were slightly off, as if whoever left them had been walking on the tips of their toes for years. The prints led from the bed frame to the wall I had just destroyed, and they stopped right at the edge of the hole, as if something had been standing there facing the drywall, waiting to be let out. I stumbled backward, and my heel crushed the porcelain doll. The sound was a sickening ceramic crunch, and instantly the air in the hallway changed. The cold spot detonated outward like an invisible bomb. The temperature gauge in my hand flashed a warning before the LCD screen shattered. I could see my own breath in frantic little clouds, and then I heard the bed frame in that hidden room creak, just once, a groaning, heavy squeal of rusted metal, like something had shifted its weight. I didn't scream, I couldn't. The handwritten warning was seared into my vision. Don't let it hear you breathe. I pressed my back against the opposite hallway wall, my hand clamped so tightly over my mouth that my knuckles ached. My lungs were burning, desperate for air, but I refused to inhale. The scratching started from inside the hole, slow, methodical. A dragging sound of keratin on plaster, like fingernails counting down a rhythm I couldn't understand. 1, 2, 3. It stopped. Then a wet, clicking noise, like a tongue unsticking from the roof of a dry mouth, echoed directly behind the jagged edge of the drywall. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the carpet, spinning a maddening carousel of shadows across the hallway walls, and in that strobe light of terror, I saw a silhouette shift in the hole. It was tall, emaciated, and it bent at an angle that suggested its spine had been folded in half backward. It didn't step out. It flowed, like liquid static bleeding from the gap. My body went into survival autopilot. I stopped breathing entirely, and I ran down the stairs on numb legs, my hand trailing the banister as the temperature in the house plummeted. The family photos I'd hung on the wall the day before shattered one by one as I passed, the glass exploding outward from the frames. The front door was 10 feet away, and I heard it coming down the stairs behind me. Not with footsteps, but with a soft, moist slithering that suggested it was crawling along the ceiling. I wrenched the door open, burst onto the frozen front lawn, and didn't stop running until I was in my locked car, the engine screaming. I sat there, gasping for air, staring at the house, and that's when I saw the upstairs window, the room I'd just escaped. The light I'd left on flickered 3 times, and then every single bulb in the house went dark. I never went back inside. I left every possession behind, defaulted on the mortgage, and drove straight to a motel 3 towns over. I live in a cramped apartment now, 6 states away, with thermal cameras covering every wall and an industrial-grade space heater running year-round. The air never feels warm enough anymore, and I haven't had a single full night's sleep since. Last week, a neighbor in my new building knocked on my door to ask if I was okay, because maintenance had gotten noise complaints from the vacant unit above mine. They said it sounded like someone was scratching on the floorboards directly over my bedroom, exactly between 300 and 4:14 a.m. I knew the time without her saying it. 41 degrees. The number was seared into my brain. I haven't been back to my apartment since then either. I'm staying with my brother now, writing this from a couch that isn't mine, surrounded by salt lines and motion sensors. But I know it won't matter, because early this morning I caught a chill in his guest bathroom, a specific spot on the wall right outside the door, and I didn't need an infrared gun to know what temperature it was. I pressed my ear to the drywall and held my breath, and somewhere deep inside the structure, that same wet, clicking tongue answered back. Don't let it hear you breathe. The worst part isn't the fear of dying, it's the realization that I never actually escaped. I just kicked through the thin, fragile walls of one room, only to realize the entire world is just another box waiting to be opened. It's in the walls again, listening. and I am so tired of holding my breath. My name is Lisa Grady, and I used to think basements were the safest places in a storm. I bought a century-old farmhouse outside Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, back in 2019. A fixer-upper with good bones, a wraparound porch, and a history I was too naive to question. The first time I heard the crying, I blamed the wind. It was a soft, hiccuping whimper that bled through the basement wall around 2 in the morning. I'd be down there doing laundry, and a sound like a small child sniffling would drift through the concrete blocks. I told myself it was old pipes, a settling foundation, or the stray cats that roamed the property. But cats don't sound like a 3-year-old whispering mummy into the dark. The crying didn't stay in the basement. It followed me. I'd be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when a muffled sob would vibrate through the floorboards beneath my mattress. The farmhouse had a dirt cellar originally, partially modernized with a concrete slab decades ago, but the east wall was still exposed stone and crumbling mortar. The sound came from behind that wall, and the dread that pooled in my stomach every night felt ancient and heavy, like the house itself was holding a secret it wanted to vomit up. I tried to ignore it for 3 months. I cranked white noise machines, wore earplugs, and pretended I wasn't a grown woman terrified of the dark, but the crying got louder and more insistent, evolving from whimpers into full-blown wails that would stop the very instant I flicked on a light. Something wanted my attention, and ignoring it was making it angry. One Saturday, I finally snapped. I grabbed a sledgehammer, a respirator mask, and a portable work light, and I descended the basement stairs with my heart battering my rib cage. The east wall looked unremarkable, just grey stone and crumbling mortar, damp from decades of groundwater. But when I pressed my palm against the rock, it felt unnaturally warm, like sun-baked skin stretched tight over a feverish body. I swung the sledgehammer. The stone didn't just crack, it shattered inward, as if the wall had been desperate to collapse. A wave of hot, fetid air rushed out, carrying the thick perfume of decayed flowers, stale baby powder, and something sharp and metallic I recognized as old blood. I choked, stumbling backward as my work light illuminated the impossible space beyond, a hidden nursery, sealed behind the wall like a tomb. The room was tiny, maybe 8 feet by 8. Wallpapered in a peeling pattern of faded carousel horses. There was a whitewashed iron crib, its mattress long since rotted to black sludge. A rocking chair sat in the corner, still moving gently as if someone had just risen from it. And on a low shelf, arranged in neat little rows, were dozens of glass baby bottles, each one filled with a thick, reddish-black substance that had coagulated decades ago. But the detail that shattered my sanity was the handprints. Tiny, 4-fingered handprints covered every surface, stamped in what looked like dried blood. They climbed the walls, crisscrossed the ceiling, and circled the crib in frantic, overlapping spirals. In the center of the room, directly beneath a bare bulb that had no power source, sat a child's diary bound in cracked pink leather. I should have run, but the book felt like a command. I opened it. The handwriting started neat and childish and degraded page by page into jagged, psychotic scrawl. Mommy says I'm sick. Mommy says I can't play outside anymore. The doctor came and he looked scared. Mommy built me a new room. She says it's to keep me safe. But I hear the shadows whispering at night. They say I'm not sick. They say I'm special. I turned another page and my blood turned to ice. Mommy locked the door today. She pushes food through the little hole. She won't look at me anymore. She says my eyes aren't right. The shadows told me her secret. The shadows say Mommy isn't my real mommy. The shadows say I grew in her belly like a mushroom, not a baby. The final entry was barely legible, pressed into the paper with such force. The pages had torn. Mommy stopped coming. I'm so hungry. The shadows say I can eat them instead. The shadows say I can become them. Today I'm going to crawl out through the dark space, the space behind the world, the space behind the walls. I'll find a new mommy. I'll find one who won't lock me away. The diary slipped from my fingers, and that's when I heard the rocking chair creak behind me. I spun around, the work light swinging wildly, and for one heart-stopping second, I saw a small, pale figure perched on the chair. Its skin was the color of a fish belly, stretched translucent over bones that bulged in all the wrong places. Its eyes were black mirrors reflecting nothing, and its mouth moved without sound, forming a single word over and over. "Mommy," I screamed. The figure flickered and dissolved, but the cold it left behind did not. The temperature in the hidden nursery plummeted so fast my lips went numb, and the bare bulb on the ceiling began to glow with a sickly amber light, even though there were no wires connected to it. The walls started to sweat, dark droplets oozing from the plaster, and the baby bottles on the shelf began to vibrate in a horrible glassy hum. I scrambled backward through the hole I'd made, my feet slipping on the damp concrete floor of the basement. The stone I'd shattered wasn't just a wall, it was a barrier, and I had just torn it wide open. The crying started again, but now it was right behind me. I felt a small, icy hand brush the back of my neck as I bolted up the basement stairs. My lungs were searing with panic, and every breath I took felt like inhaling liquid nitrogen. The farmhouse groaned around me, the old wood twisting and splintering, and the light bulb in the kitchen exploded in a shower of sparks as I burst through the door. I didn't stop. I grabbed my keys, left the front door swinging open, and drove barefoot all the way to a hotel in Harrisburg. I never went back. I sent a moving company to retrieve my belongings. They refused to enter the house after the foreman saw the basement. I didn't ask what he saw. I didn't want to know. I sold the farmhouse at a catastrophic loss to a developer who bulldozed it 6 months later. I thought destroying the structure would destroy the room. I was wrong, because the crying followed me. I'm renting a one-bedroom apartment in Pittsburgh now, a modern high-rise with concrete walls and a security door. I should feel safe, but every night, between 200 and 3 a.m., I hear a soft scratching behind the drywall beside my bed. It's a rhythmic, patient scraping, like small fingernails tracing the shape of a door that isn't there yet. Last Tuesday, I woke to find a child's handprint on the mirror in my bathroom. It was too high for a real child to reach, pressed into the glass from the inside, and when I tried to wipe it away, my fingers came back wet and cold. The next morning, I found the same handprint on the inside of my refrigerator, then on the ceiling above my pillow, then on the window of my locked car. It's marking me, claiming me. I've started researching the farmhouse's history. The original owner in 1904 was a widow named Eleanor Vance. She had a daughter, Alice, who was born with a rare congenital disorder that Eleanor believed was demonic possession. The girl vanished from public records in 1910, no death certificate, no grave, just gone. The local historical society unearthed a letter Eleanor wrote to her sister a year before her own death. I sealed the room, I sealed her inside with the sickness. God forgive me. But the thing that wore her face was not my child. It is still there waiting. It will wait forever. If it must, do not let it out. I let it out. And now, as I write this from my couch, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by every light in the apartment blazing, I hear it breathing in the walls. A wet, congested rattle, the sound of a child who never learned to breathe properly because it was never given the chance. I feel the cold spot growing behind my refrigerator. I see the condensation freezing on my windows. And last night, just before dawn, the crying stopped for the first time in weeks, and a small, broken voice whispered directly into my ear from the other side of the drywall, "Found you." I don't think it wants to scare me. I think it wants to climb back into a womb, any womb, and start over. I think it wants to burrow into my skin and wear me like a suit, just like the shadows taught it. I'm not sleeping anymore. I'm not eating. I'm just waiting for the wall beside me to crumble inward, because I know it will. Eventually, the handprints are getting larger. Whatever was sealed in that basement isn't just a ghost. It's a hungry, patient thing, and it's been practicing for over a century how to crawl through the dark space behind the world. If you ever hear a child crying in your basement, don't break the wall open. Don't investigate. Just pack your things, set the house on fire, and run as far as you can. Because some rooms aren't hidden to keep things out, they're hidden to keep things in. and once you let them out, you can never ever get them back inside. My name is Connor Walsh, and I found the room by accident. I'd lived in my downtown Seattle apartment for 2 years before I noticed the discrepancy. The building was a renovated textile factory from the 1920s, all exposed brick and industrial pipes, and I loved the gritty charm of it. But charm doesn't explain why your bedroom wall is 2 feet thicker than the floor plan says it should be. It started with a water stain, a small brownish bloom spreading across the drywall near my closet, and when I pressed my palm against it, the surface felt cold and soft, like pressing on a rotten tooth. I called the building super, a tired man named Reggie who had seen too much in these old units. He cut a small inspection hole, shined a flashlight inside, and the color drained from his face. He muttered something about calling the city, grabbed his tools, and left without another word. He never came back. That should have been my warning, but the hole was right there, and the darkness beyond was whispering an invitation. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hole in my wall felt like an eye, watching me from the closet. I kept hearing sounds I couldn't explain, a soft, rhythmic scuttling, like bare feet on hardwood, the creak of a floorboard that didn't exist in my apartment. At 3:12 a.m., I heard something that shattered my denial, a distinct human exhalation drifting from the hole, as if someone on the other side was pressing their lips directly against the plaster. I got up, grabbed a crowbar, and widened the hole with trembling hands. The dry wall crumbled like stale cake, revealing a narrow, vertical gap that shouldn't have been possible. The building's blueprints showed solid brick between units, but someone had excavated a hidden corridor barely wide enough for a person to turn sideways. The walls of the passage were lined with old mirrors, cracked and tarnished, reflecting my flashlight beam into an infinite, disorienting regress of myself. I squeezed inside. The air was thick and stagnant, carrying the coppery tang of rust and something faintly organic, like rotting flowers. The corridor sloped downward, and with every step, the temperature dropped further. My breath plumed in the flashlight beam, and then I saw the door. It was small, arched, and made of blackened wood, bolted shut with a heavy iron latch that looked like it had been forged in a different century. Someone had scratched a message into the doorframe with a blade, the letters jagged and desperate. She watches from the glass. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the latch was already under my hand, cold as frozen iron, and the curiosity that has damned so many of us was a roaring fire in my chest. I slid the bolt, and the door swung inward on silent, ancient hinges. The room beyond was circular. It didn't belong in any apartment building. It felt like a chapel built for something unholy. The walls were completely covered in mirrors of every shape and size, from ornate Victorian frames to shattered shards glued into a mosaic. In the center of the room stood a single wooden chair facing the largest mirror, which hung opposite the door like an altarpiece. The floor around the chair was stained a deep, permanent brown, and resting on the seat was a leather-bound journal, warped and bloated with moisture. I didn't want to touch it. I touched it anyway. The journal belonged to a woman named Evelyn Marsh, dated 1932. The entries started clinically, the writing of a scientist or a spiritualist. She had discovered this hidden space during the textile factory days, a room the original architect had sealed behind a false wall. Evelyn believed the mirrors formed a spiritual resonator, a device to contact the dead. But by the third entry, her tone shifted from curiosity to terror. I saw her today, a woman in the glass, but she isn't my reflection. She stands behind me when I sit in the chair. She has my face, but her eyes are black pits, and she's always smiling. I think she's learning how to move. I turned the page, my hands shaking so badly the paper tore. She can blink now. I caught her blinking yesterday. My reflection blinked, but I did not. I'm not sure which of us is the real one anymore. I've sealed the door. I will not enter the mirror room again. God help me if she figures out how to open the glass from her side. The final entry was a single sentence, gouged into the paper with an unsteady hand. She's not behind me anymore. She's in the glass, and she's tapping from the inside. A sound erupted behind me. A sharp, crystalline tap against glass. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the circular room, and the mirrors threw my terrified reflection back at me from 100 angles. But one of the reflections wasn't right. In the largest mirror, the one facing the chair, I saw myself standing exactly as I was, except the reflection's eyes were solid black voids, and it was smiling with a mouth that contained too many teeth. I didn't move. The reflection tilted its head and took a step closer to the glass. My own legs were locked in place, but the thing in the mirror was pacing toward me with a fluid, predatory grace, its smile widening beyond human possibility. It pressed its palms flat against the inside of the glass, and the surface began to bulge outward like stretched latex. The tapping grew louder, frantic, a drumbeat of desperate hunger. I realized with nauseating clarity that the glass wasn't a mirror at all. It was a prison, and I had just unlocked the door to its cell. I bolted. The narrow corridor tore at my clothes and skin as I squeezed through, the mirrors on the walls reflecting not my escape, but the creature's pursuit, her black eyes burning from every surface. I heard the glass in the circular room shatter behind me with a deafening crash, and then a barefoot sprint echoing up the corridor, gaining speed. I launched myself through the hall into my bedroom and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, my iron dumbbell. And I swung it at the wall. The drywall collapsed, burying the corridor entrance in a cascade of plaster and shattered studs. I didn't stop until the hole was completely sealed under a mountain of debris, and I stood there, gasping, drenched in cold sweat, listening. The apartment was silent. The tapping had stopped, but the silence felt temporary, like a predator holding its breath. I moved out the next morning. I left everything, my furniture, my clothes, my entire life packed into that apartment. I crashed on a friend's couch for a month, then rented a basement studio in Tacoma, a windowless concrete bunker with not a single mirror on the premises. I thought distance and time would make the horror fade. I was wrong. A week ago, I was washing my hands in a public restroom when I glanced at the mirror above the sink. My reflection stared back at me, normal and tired, and then it blinked. I hadn't blinked. I froze, water running over my fingers, and I watched my reflection's lips curl into that same too wide smile I'd seen in the hidden room. It mouthed a single word: "Found you." Now I see her everywhere. The glass of a microwave door, the darkened screen of my phone, the reflection in a puddle of rain on the sidewalk. She's always there, standing just behind my shoulder, her black hole eyes drinking in my fear. She's learning, just like Evelyn wrote, learning how to move, how to mimic, how to step through the glass when the moment is right. I've covered every reflective surface in my studio with black paint and duct tape. I live in a world of dull, matte surfaces, a cave of my own making. But last night, I woke to the sound of tapping, a delicate, patient rhythm coming from inside the bathroom mirror I'd forgotten to cover. The tape I'd plastered over it was bulging outward, stretching like a membrane about to burst. A crack split the drywall beneath the mirror, and a thin trickle of black, viscous fluid oozed down the wall, filling my apartment with the smell of ozone and rot. She's not just in the mirrors anymore, she's in the walls. She's in the space behind everything, that thin membrane between our world and whatever dark dimension she calls home. And I know, with a certainty that hollows my bones, that one night soon I will wake up to the sound of shattering glass, and I will not be alone in my bed. If you ever find a hidden room, sealed and silent, with mirrors that don't reflect quite right, don't go inside, don't read the journals, don't sit in the chair, just burn the building to the ground and salt the earth where it stood, because some doors aren't meant to keep you out, they're meant to keep her in. And once she sees your face, she'll never stop watching you from the other side of the glass. And that brings us to the end of tonight's descent into the spaces that shouldn't exist. 3 hidden rooms, 3 lives forever fractured, and a darkness that refuses to stay sealed. If your heart is still drumming against your ribs, you're not alone. The cold spot, the scratching, the mirrors that watch, they're not just campfire tales, they're warnings. And the next time you hear a strange sound behind your drywall, maybe you'll think twice before lifting a hammer. If these stories crawled under your skin, smash that like button and subscribe to Mr. Whisper's Official, so you never miss a midnight journey into the unknown. Drop a comment below with the hidden room that terrified you most, and share your own nightmare fuel if you've ever found something that shouldn't exist. Until next time, keep your lights on and your back firmly against the wall.